Okay, so in the last lecture, I introduced what we mean by this term liberalism. And remember, I laid out what I thought were four distinguishing features of liberalism: state neutrality, legal equality of citizens, emphasis on rights, and rule of law. And in the last lecture, I said a little bit about each of these, very briefly explained what they were. In this lecture and in the next one, I want to go more deeply into each of these features of liberalism. In this lecture, I'll talk a bit more about what state neutrality means and the legal equality of citizens. In the next lecture, I'll talk about the emphasis on rights, or at least I will a little bit. We're actually going to spend a lot more time on what rights mean and why they're important in the next unit, but we'll at least raise it here. And finally, the rule of law. 1 and 2 we'll talk about in this lecture, 3 and 4 in the next lecture. In the next lecture, I also hope to say a little bit about the support for liberalism. I said, Americans, the founding fathers, were liberals in this sense, and I think it should be clear to you guys once we're done that they were. Look at the Declaration, look at the Bill of Rights. But, that's not a completely satisfying argument. Hey, look, the founding fathers were Americans, shouldn't we? Whatever, that's an argument from authority. As I said, arguments from authority in ethics tend not to be super convincing, right? So I do want to talk about some independent reasons that people support this liberal system or find it attractive. I'm not going to give you guys a strict premise, conclusion argument for it, but I do want to talk about some supporting considerations in the next lecture. The reason I'm not going to go too deeply into it, these are things we're going to touch on again and again throughout the semester. We will talk about it in the next unit and the one after and in the final unit. So a lot of this is just taking a first pass at this, but I do think it's important to take a first pass. Okay, so going back to this issue of state neutrality. Now, I said last time, that part of it was the state shouldn't have an official religion, shouldn't meddle in religion. But I think it means a bit more than this. State neutrality is, I think, what people are getting at when they say the state shouldn't enforce morality. Now honestly, this claim that the state shouldn't enforce morality, if taken literally, is kind of crazy, right? Obviously the state sometimes should enforce morality, right? It's immoral to kill people. It is immoral to take their stuff without a very good reason. It is immoral just to walk up and punch somebody in the face, right? And guess what? The state should enforce all of that. It should punish you. You should be arrested. You should go to jail and pay fines, if not more, if you violate those moral norms. So there's pretty clearly some moral norms, some morality the state, the government should enforce, right? What people are getting at, though, I think, is that there's a sort of private morality that might be important to people, but the government shouldn't force it on anybody. And what liberalism says about this is that the government should not promote any specific vision of what a good life is. Now, look, early liberal theorists like John Locke, who is a big influence on Jefferson, who is a big influence on modern political thought generally, and Jefferson himself and a lot of other people, people like Kant. Kant was definitely a liberal in this sense, will focus on religion. But contemporary liberals like Rawls will widen the scope. And what this means by, the state shouldn't promote any vision of the good life, well, part of it I think you can see with religion, right? The state shouldn't favor Christianity, it shouldn't favor Islam, it shouldn't favor Judaism, it shouldn't favor any specific kind of any of those religions. But the state also shouldn't meddle in people's thoughts about what a good life for them is, right? If you are a fanatic fitness, health, and diet person, and you think the good life for every human being is you should be in just great physical shape and eat some kind of very particular diet, well, fine and good for you, but the state shouldn't pass laws that tries to make everybody do that, right? If you think that a good life is, having, the average number of kids and whatever, well, fine for you, but the state shouldn't go passing laws trying to force people to have children, right? That is a very specific version of the good life. I think the good life involves reading a lot of philosophy, well, but the government shouldn't go passing laws that pay people for reading a lot of philosophy or fine them for not reading enough philosophy, right? That is a very specific vision of what the good life is. The government shouldn't meddle. Also, part of this is the reasons for laws and policies should not depend on particular views about the good life. What do I mean by that? Well, imagine that someone wants to put restrictions on alcohol because he's one of these fanatical fitness people, right? We should restrict alcohol because, the healthy body is the most important thing in life and alcohol's bad for you. So ban it or slap huge taxes on it, right? That is a policy that has a particular vision of what a good life is, right? Also, if I wanted to ban or restrict alcohol and my reason was, I quote some Bible verse or a verse from the Quran, that is a very specific vision of the good life. I make some claims about, God's importance in our life and what he wants for us. That would not fit with liberal policy. But contrast that with, imagine I say, well, look, we should put some restrictions on alcohol, we should tax it, we should make it hard to get, and we should do it because alcohol makes people violent. I mean, it actually does. There's all kinds of proof, all kinds of evidence linking alcohol with violence. And look, we don't want people out and about drunk, going about getting in fights with people, breaking their stuff, hurting them, right? Or I say, look, people who drink tend to go drive, and when they drive, they get in accidents. You don't want to get run over by a car. You don't want somebody to put their car through your fence and drive into your living room, right? None of that depends on a specific vision of the good life. No one wants to get punched in the face. Whether you are a fitness fanatic or a couch potato, whether you are a Muslim or a Christian or a hardcore atheist, you don't want somebody to go slug you in the face, right? So if our rationale for restricting alcohol is it makes people violent, that doesn't depend on any particular conception of the good life. No one wants to get run over by a car, right? No one wants somebody's random car to drive through the front of your house and into your living room. If alcohol makes people more likely to get in accidents and hurt others or damage their property or both, well, again, that doesn't depend on a particular conception of the good life. Fitness freak, couch potato, Christian, Muslim, atheist, no one wants to get hit by a car. No one wants a car randomly running through the front of their house into their living room. Now, look, I'm not saying that that's a good reason to restrict alcohol or we should restrict alcohol. We'll talk more about drug laws in the next section, but I'm just trying to draw this distinction. That is at least a reason that liberalism wouldn't rule out to start with, because it doesn't depend on any particular conception of the good life, right? Or let me give you guys one more example. Say that you have some I'm sorry, I won't use the term fanatical. It's kind of biased, right? But say that you have some hippie and he talks a lot about, Mother Earth, Gaia, that's the most important thing in the world. and he wants to put a bunch of restrictions on coal mining because he's like, coal mining hurts Mother Earth. Just gouges right into our poor mother, right? Oh, it just harms Gaia. That would not pass the test for liberalism. All his claims about Mother Earth and its importance depend on a particular conception of what a good life is. Contrast that with, hey, we should put some restrictions on coal mining because if you don't and people just mine wherever they want, it puts mercury in the water. If you drink mercury in the water, that's going to damage your brain and cause all these other bad effects. So, hey, some restrictions, right? You do not need to make any assumptions about Mother Earth or Gaia or whatever to think that drinking mercury is bad, right? No matter what you think about the good life, no one thinks that drinking mercury is good. No one wants mercury in their drinking water, right? Our hippies' reasons don't pass the test for liberalism. The, hey, you don't want mercury in your water reasons, they do. So hopefully this gives you guys a better sense of what we mean by government or state neutrality. Next feature of liberalism, and this one is a really, really tough one, is legal equality. Laws and legal systems should not treat people differently on the basis of things like race, religion, gender, socioeconomic status, background, so on. All people created equal, right? Due process clause in the post-Civil War amendments to the Constitution. Now, this one is a hard one because it is very easy to point out definite violations. But it is hard to say without some controversy what it actually requires. Let me give you guys some examples, right? Medieval Europe, if you were a peasant, you would go into a different legal system than a lord, than, somebody who was in the nobility. There were separate legal systems, different punishments for peasants and nobility. What's more, in medieval Europe, if you were a peasant, there were certain professions, certain positions in society you were legally barred from, right? Same with religion. If you were Jewish in medieval Europe, most professions you were legally barred from. You just couldn't do it. There were laws saying, if you're Jewish, you can't be X, Y, Z, right? That clearly violates liberalism. You should not have separate courts, separate punishments for nobility and peasants. You should not have laws that say people of this religion can't do this job. Very easy to find violations. Or look at current day Iran, right? Current day Iran, definitely not a liberal government. And in current day Iran, Shia Islam, if you were Shia, there's all kinds of things that you can legally do that, Sunni Muslims, Christians, Jews can't do in that society. There is not legal equality there. It's very, very easy to point out cases, clear things that violate this legal equality condition. What's hard, though, is to decide what it actually requires. In our legal system, there's not poor people court and rich people court. You go to the same court, right? Is that enough for legal equality, though? I don't know. Because, people on the right might think it is, but people on the left will point out, well, rich people get way better lawyers. Rich people can afford bail, poor people can't, right? Does our legal system do enough that it satisfies legal equality? Nobody is barred from certain professions legally. Anybody can grow up to be president. But, if your dad is a senator, you have a way better chance of growing up to be president than if your dad you know, well, if your dad, pretty much if your dad is anything else besides a multimillionaire, right? We'll talk a lot more in the unit on distributive justice about this legal equality condition. Rawls and Nozick will have a lot of things to say about it and some completely different things. Just know that this is a hard one. I think in our society, people on the left and people on the right will tend to agree with this condition, but the debate is going to be, well, what exactly it requires. Anyway, that's just, we'll talk way more about it in the future. Just for now, I think it's enough to know, to be able to clearly point out some things that violate legal equality.